Welcome to the show. It's Chris Graham. It's Monday, and I'm joined by Rod Mullins. We're going to talk some NASCAR as the Cup Series finished up its spring swing through Virginia in Martinsville. Just yesterday, in fact, this past weekend, with a duel for the last 29 laps. Joey Logano, who had been back in the pack for a good part of the race, and he worked his way up to the front, and Kyle Larson, they were doing those last little bit there, and Kyle Larson gets the win. Kind of a surprise there, Ron, that Larson, who has not traditionally run well at this track, was able to come out with the win.
Yeah, I think it was a big win for him, considering he has not done that well at Martinsville before in the past. But the team, I think more than anything else, gambled, and I think that's one of the things that really paid off for him. Gambling out of this thing, especially in NASCAR, seems to be one of those things that everybody's kind of living for right now. Hey, do I keep on 2 tires? Do I keep on 4 tires? Do I go and pit for gas, with, so many laps left to go? Larson just managed to be able to have that late race 2-tire pit stop to give him that chance to win on Sunday afternoon at Martinsville. And, he did it in convincing style for about a 4-second win, 4-second lead over Joey Logano. But, I'm kind of glad that it did not end up as it could have been. You had Ryan Preece that was on the pole. Ryan Preece and Kyle Larson got into it last week at Bristol, and this past week, Ryan Preece was leading at least about 135 laps of this thing before he kind of faded back. A great performance by the Stewart-Haas team, as they had three of the 4 teams, I think, that they had all together. They were in there in contention for it there. Kevin Harvick had another good outing. But, for Larson, it was one of these dramatic things that had to happen. And besides, he had to go and, how can I say this, steal a little bit of the limelight from Chase Elliott, who made a surprise return. And his Hendrick Motorsports drivers, fellow drivers, did not know he was coming back this weekend until the announcement was made. That's kind of weird sounding, to be honest with you. You would think that Hendrick, as big as an operation as they were, was going to share this with all of the drivers, but they did not. And so Elliott comes back and finishes, of all things, starts out 27th, 24th, or 27th, ends up finishing 10th. And it was a great performance for Elliott in a comeback after he'd been sidelined with that leg injury, that break that he got while he was skiing in Colorado.
Yeah, I got the numbers here. Larson, in his previous 17 races at Martinsville, had only 3 top 5s. He'd never finished better than 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
He joked that he didn't have a room picked out where he'd put that big 6-foot-tall grandfather clock that goes to the winner in Martinsville. So what a race for him. And I'd say similarly for Logano, he had to start at the back of the pack after an issue at the start of the race, a leak in his water tank. Worked his way all the way back up to 2nd, and he said after the race that he was kind of he was actually glad there was no restart. I'm sure some of his fans were hoping for a chance in those late laps for a restart, but he said he didn't think he had the car to actually overtake Larson at the end there, so he was thrilled with 2nd place.
Yeah, and the Fords did well, I think, at the track this past weekend. Stewart-Haas, like I mentioned earlier, they're 3 of 4 drivers combined to lead 264 laps out of 400. And then you had, of course, with Ryan Preece there leading the way for them. But, Team Penske with Ryan Blaney, he ended up finishing 7th, and Joey Logano finishing 2nd. So that's not bad whatsoever for that Team Penske team. They kind of like short tracks. Joey Logano likes a short track. Martinsville may not be his favorite at times, but wow, what a finish for him yesterday, coming up, being from the back of the pack and managing to get all the way to the front and contend there for the race.
So you mentioned Elliott. He said after the race that, not only was he sitting on a couch for 6 weeks, but it was pretty warm there in Martinsville yesterday. So that might have got him more than anything else. But, that just goes to show, again, I know some fans, and maybe some more casual fans might think, well, you're just driving around in a car for how many ever miles.
Right.
But it takes endurance. It takes a lot of, but not only physical endurance, but mental endurance as well to compete. And he said that was a factor for him yesterday, just being out there for a few weeks.
Yeah, I noticed him getting into the car, and he was real ginger getting inside the car. I mean, it was one of those things of, I don't push myself in here. I just don't go in and slide in and get in the car. He kind of took his time about getting into the car. And then after the race, he's sitting outside the car, and he's sitting there with his left leg stretched out. And then, of course, he's kind of recovering from all this. Yeah, it was a little bit overcast. They'd had some showers, or at least a chance of some showers, but the humidity. And then on top of that, with the car itself, yeah, I don't see where people get off, saying that this is not a sport, or at least in the sense of things, because I go back to that same thing again with Randall Cunningham, and we know where Randall Cunningham is at today. He's not a quarterback. He's not a coach, that, as far as I know, in the NFL or anything, but he was the first to make the slap against some of these drivers and saying, they're not athletes as far as I'm concerned. Well, much of these drivers, I should say, go in, they're in a weight program. They go and lift weights, they run, they jog. I don't know, Jimmy Johnson was running, I think, at one time or something.
He was running marathons. Yeah, he was running marathon. Yeah.
And so Mark Martin at one time, going back several years, Mark Martin was doing heavy lifting, and you have to see Mark Martin. I mean, if you've ever pictured the old cartoon of Adam Ant, that's what he looked like. I mean, big in the chest, little in the waist, and just little all the way down. And he'd just walk around, and he was just like this all the time. And people were like, why do you do this? And he says, hey, it pushes my endurance to be able to make it in these cars. And he says, I had to quit some things, and so that's what he did. And some of these drivers do this on a regular basis, and they make it look easy. That's all I can say about it. They make it look easy, but it's far from being easy.
And then for anybody who has that observation, think about the last time you drove on a vacation to the beach or something like that. And if you just drove a couple 100 miles, you got exhausted from it. And that's not driving with bumper to bumper with 38 or 40 or how many ever other cars going sometimes 200 miles an hour while you're doing that. So
yeah, it's just, and the slamming, especially at Martinsville, being such close quarters, it's flat. There's very little banking to the surface. It's a test. It's an endurance test all the way around for your car. Gosh, the brakes, the rotors, that's one of the biggest tests of more than anything else. How much you use your brake, how much you end up using your left leg to control the brake while you keep the gas down with the right foot, and then what you do back and forth. It's a test. It's not only just a physical test, but it is a mental test as well of how you can come out, especially in a very tough race like this.
So after the last couple of weeks on short tracks, Bristol and Martinsville, the series now goes to the other extreme and a different kind of test, since we're using the word test to describe these races, going to Talladega. It'll be wide open, 2.5 mile track. I mean, the super speedway effect, the big one is always in play. So, how I kind of ask your thoughts on the transition. I mean, you've been driving, these guys have been driving around on short tracks and bumping and banging on short tracks, and now they're going out onto a completely, it's got to be like a different sport going out there to Talladega next week.
Yeah, it's going to be. And, these cars have proven what they can do, especially on high banking and so forth. They've already raced at Daytona. We got a sample of what they can do, but Talladega is a little bit of a different story. Talladega is just, it's built for speed. There's no other way around it. It's just one of these tracks that is built for speed. And these guys are going to get the wake up call, so to speak, of, the beating and banging is not going to happen at Talladega, because if they do, we're going to have carnage all over the track. And there'll be somebody that pushes the topic just a little bit, and how well they stick together. And, these teams are going to have to really, really work together. And I go back to that same thing that Kyle Busch complained about. Nobody respects one another out on the track, on the track or off the track. These guys are going to have to get some quick respect toward each other when they're out there on the track, because especially if Kyle Busch is leading the pack, or if it's a Eric Jones or somebody like that, they have to be able to go and signal to the rest of the cars, hey, this is where I'm going. Follow me. I don't want to go and get pulled back by you coming out on the outside of me unless we're in clear air and we're in open space. I don't want you to go and get outside of me, take the air off of me, and then shoot me backwards all the way through the lineup, and then quite possibly bring the cars in the draft and then slam together and we have a big wreck on it. Everybody has to pay attention, especially going around Talladega, and the speeds. I don't think they're going to be approaching anywhere over 200 miles an hour, but they're going to be still in the 180s, 190, at least up into that kind of point on the miles per hour. But it's going to be a very tricky test for these guys. They should be able to make the transition from the short track to the super speedway, but I don't know. It's going to be one of those that's going to be up in the air, especially by the time we get through to Saturday. We'll see how everything goes with the Xfinity series when they race. And then also by the time they'll get an idea of how things are by Sunday, we could have some of the best racing you'll ever see probably this weekend at Talladega. And then again, we could be having a demolition derby like you see at your local fair.
Yeah, exactly. That's especially if there's a late race restart and everybody's out there trying to push for position late. So your thoughts on, I mean, who traditionally runs well here, who based on early season runs on big tracks, do you expect might get a leg up here this weekend?
Well, I would say you probably got to count Stenhouse in that. Stenhouse won the Daytona 500. He likes a super speedway. He's had success at Talladega. He won when he was with Roush Fenway Racing there before he made the jump to JTG. He's had some success there. So when I start talking about that, I have to also include in there more than anybody else Trackhouse Racing. And I think beyond the shadow of a doubt, Ross Chastain could probably be someone to have to deal with. He had a win there on the high banks there at Talladega. He's had one before, but we'll get to see Hendrick, at least Hendrick in this case, kind of flexing their muscle, so to speak, in the engine department to see how far they've come. And I think we'll also see a little bit of a test from RCR and see what Richard Childress and company, what their engine company and they have that's making their engines, what they have to produce for them coming up this weekend. But I don't count out the Fords. And, Toyota has been making a rise back to the top here. Can't say enough about Joe Gibbs Racing. Martin Truex actually finishing in the top 5, if I'm not mistaken, on Sunday. Martin Truex would love nothing more than to get a super speedway win. But it all remains to be seen how these cars are going to come off the trailer, if everything's going to be okay. Practice could tell us a story. You could also have practice. You could have a foul up in qualifying. It's all comes down to this one big race, and the big one, like you were mentioning, and that's Talladega. It could happen and it might not. We may get through it and not even have to worry about it. But my chances are, if I was really wanting to put a bet down with anybody like MGM or, FanDuel or anybody like that, and they ask you, who's going to have the big one this coming week? What lap is it going to happen? I don't know about that, but there will be a big one.
That's Talladega Sunday at 3:00, and we'll have all the coverage here on Augusta Free Press on Facebook, and then Rod and I will be getting back together next Monday to break down all the action for you. Well, Rod, as always, thank you for your time and your insight.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.